You're in the 06010.
Hello and welcome into Fantasy Focus Football presented by Wingstop alongside Field Yates and Stephania Bell. My name is Daniel Dopp, coming off a very exciting down-to-the-wire Monday night football game. Field, on Monday you mentioned big performances, and we got another massive performance from a wide receiver. Unfortunately, it was the wrong wide receiver.
Well, that's fair. You do bring up a good point. I guess we're going right there right now. You know, yesterday on Twitter, as I said this on the show as well, but I said T for 23 was my hope going into last night. The good news is T. Higgins got you 23 receiving yards. That's not 23 fantasy points. Exactly 23 receiving yards. So perhaps there was some sort of cohesion between me and T. It just wasn't nearly enough. As congratulations to Stephania Bell for securing the final spot here in the Fantasy Focus Show League.
Yeah, we'll dive into that a little bit more later too.
T didn't do enough.
Fell backwards into the end zone, if you will.
Let's dive into this. We'll talk about our show league a little bit later on in the show today. Obviously, we're doing Monday Night Football recap. We're diving into some waiver wires and some injuries. But first, we got to start with this Bengals team. My gosh, Jamar Chase put on a freaking show. I mean, if you needed a big Monday night miracle from Jamar, he delivered over 45 fantasy points. That's 6 guys this week, Field, over that number that you mentioned on Monday.
34.58. So
unbelievable.
The 34.58 club has another member for week 14. And yesterday on the show, when we were talking about Puka, I was talking about how Mike had referenced the idea of Puka being the 1.01 next year, which I think is an idea that has some merit, right? Jamar Chase has something to say about that.
Yes, he did.
Jamar Chase now leads the NFL in receptions and receiving yards and receiving touchdowns. By the way, 6 more receiving touchdowns than any other player. He and Puka are 1 and 2 in terms of points per game right now. Jamar Chase is simply brilliant, and he has carried your team this season. As we reflect back on the preseason, 1 through 5 were players that we felt like were pretty comfortably deserving to be picks 1 through 5. They were, in some order, Christian McCaffrey, Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson, Tyreek Hill, and CeeDee Lamb. The correct answer was none of those guys should have been picked number 1. It should have been Jamar Chase. The correct answer to the second question was who should have been the next player up after that tier of 5. Remember, the debate was Amon-Ra versus Justin Jefferson versus Jamar Chase. I'm not going to sit here and say there was an obviously wrong answer, as it's not like Justin Jefferson or Amon-Ra is busted. These guys are all 1, 2, 3 in terms of NFL scoring leaders amongst wide receivers this year. The problem is that Jamar Chase is so far ahead of the heap that he has been the most valuable player in fantasy football this season.
Yeah, I was going to hate to start out by crediting Mike Clay, but that was the tweet that he put out last night, which you saw on the full screen there, was that Jamar Chase has 317.4 fantasy points on this season, and no other wide receiver has more than 235.2. I mean, it's like 80 points.
That's unreal. And unfortunately, like you said, there is no wrong answer because the 3 guys we were talking about, literally 1, 2, and 3, but Jamar Chase clearly the guy in this offense, and he has helped elevate so many different teams. His 3rd game with 40 points this year.
It's
3rd
ridiculous.
Game this season with 40 or more fantasy points.
It's also consistent. And it's another, I thought it was really nice, saw a graphic last night when Scott Van Pelt was doing the post-game show that I thought reminded us of how much fantasy football often correlates with real football performances. Did you know that Jamar Chase is now 4th in touchdowns in the first 4 seasons of his career?
Wow.
The leader there, Randy Moss, with 53. Then, of course, the great Jerry Rice with 49. Bob Hayes with 45, and Jamar with 44. So he has a chance to even move up in that before the season is up.
Unbelievable.
He's unbelievable. Yeah, he and Randy, the great Randy Moss, and we are all thinking about Randy Moss right now as he continues to navigate a health situation that is keeping him away from Sunday NFL Countdown. But he and Jamar are the only 2 players ever in NFL history with at least 5,000 receiving yards and 40 touchdowns in the first 4 years of their career.
Crazy.
He's just a ridiculous player. It is a joy to watch. And his offense, for fantasy purposes, other than T. Higgins last night, was terrific. Joe Burrow was great once again. And Chase Brown, guys, has any player boosted his stock in Dynasty more than Chase Brown this year?
I don't think so.
I wouldn't know. I know he's not on my team because my Dynasty League is suffering. Okay. But yeah, no, I think
he's been remarkable.
He has been. The thing is, you see these running backs who come out and have these fantastic seasons, and you always wonder, are they going to be able to do it again? Because we're going to look next year. We're going to go look at what Chase Brown did coming out of a situation where it really looked like Zach Moss was going to be the guy.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then Zach Zach Moss ends up with a neck injury that sidelines him for the remainder of the season. And Chase Brown had been inching it up. And you can see here, just look at what Chase Brown has done over the course of the season. He's going to come into next year. Where do you think he is? Do you think he's top 10?
Top 15-ish. I would put him somewhere in that range.
I hate to fence it. It depends on how they address the position because they
That's
have
a good point.
zero other than him. And we saw Khalil Herbert last night. I was
I thought that was a mirage.
stunned. I thought, I figured I was watching the Simpsons broadcast during that part,
second,
so I thought maybe they had the wrong animation up there when they had Khalil Herbert on the field. But just look at the last 5 games for Chase Brown, which really is when he took over that full-time role, week 9, with a bye in between. How's this for running back finishes by week? RB4, RB3, RB8, RB10, and RB3. So he has been an RB1 every single week. We call an RB1 any player from RB1 to RB10. He has been remarkable. He is a huge factor in the passing game as well. He had that beautiful touchdown last night where he tippy-toed the sideline. Chase Brown, truly one of the best values in all of fantasy football this season. He is going to be a monster. He will be a top 10 running back every week in my rankings for the rest of this season.
Yeah, and his passes aren't just short little screen passes either. I mean, he's shown he can catch the ball.
He's a great pass
anywhere.
catcher.
He's a great pass catcher, so huge value in that.
It's been very exciting to be able to see him continue to flourish, in spite of the fact that we thought and assumed when Khalil Herbert came over, we were going to have a little bit more of a split. Like, he's just proven that he is the guy. I'm excited to see what that means for the rest of our fantasy playoffs.
By the way, Joe Burrow, I'm sorry. I'm going to apologize
awesome.
to Joe Burrow right now. I mean, I was not expecting this performance over this season coming off of major wrist injury. And, I think even Joe Burrow, when you watch the broadcast, Joe Burrow is telling people, I mean, maybe they're not asking about it now.
Yeah.
But up until very recently, talking about the fact that he still has to loosen it up, that he still works through, does exercises for his wrist, ends up last night injuring his knee to some degree. He ends up with a sleeve on it. After the game, he said it felt fine now. He'd see how it is the next day. Something to keep an eye on. This is the same knee. He had the multi-ligament knee tear in, but Joe Burrow, just consistent.
I'm going to mention this. You mentioned consistency, Stephania, and I'll be quick on this and we can move on. Joe Burrow's last 5 games, 251 yards and 5 touchdowns, 428 yards and 4 touchdowns, 356 and 3 touchdowns, 309 and 3 touchdowns, and 369 and 3 touchdowns. He's had at least 3 passing touchdowns in 5 straight games, hitting at least 300 yards in 4 of those 5 games. He's just been a monster in this offense. I feel so bad, honestly, for him and Jamar Chase and Chase Brown because this Bengals team is playing so well, and yet their record, unfortunately, doesn't reflect it.
Well, they changed last night.
It looked so good. Dude, this was a great offense. On the other side, and do you want to mention T real quickly? Like, unfortunately, he was just the odd man out, it felt like.
Yeah, I mean, a couple drops. Like, what am I going to say? Like, coming into last night, I was thinking to myself, how likely is it for T. Higgins to score 23 or more fantasy points? Well, he's gotten there in 2 of his last 5 games, right? I mean, it's not like T. Higgins has been inconsistent for this year. When he's been healthy, he's largely produced. I don't feel any differently about T. Higgins going into Week 15 than I did going into Week 14.
I think the thing will be interesting to watch is what happens next year because Joe Burrow even talked about that they said they've been chatting. They want to try to stay together. So, we shall see.
He's a free agent. They got a lot of work to do Cincinnati
sure
to find a way to keep him.
He'd be a wide receiver 1 just about,
anywhere.
So many places he could land. Yeah.
Speaking of wide receiver 1, CeeDee Lamb, in spite of the fact he didn't get a ton of targets, only 7 targets in this game, still really good production, 6 for 93 and a touchdown, including a touchdown on the very first drive. It's like the Bengals just stopped playing defense on that play.
Well, actually, this entire season they stopped playing defense, but more accurately. But yeah, that was I was talking to Tyler, our producer, a diehard Bengals fan before the show, and I had made a joke on Twitter last night that the Bengals are actually the most consistent defense in the NFL. They never cover anybody.
They're consistent.
And you're thinking to yourself, 4th and 1, got to have it situation. If there's one guy that you're probably going to account for, it's CeeDee Lamb. No, actually, CeeDee Lamb was wide open. Runs a little corner route. In the end zone, next thing you know, he is there, and he's like, wait, is this actually happening right now? Like, he almost dropped it because he was so wide open.
Yep.
Fantasy managers who have rostered CeeDee Lamb, as I have, understand that was so appreciated because we have not seen a wide open CeeDee Lamb catch a touchdown pass in a while. And you've had ups and downs with him throughout the season. He's had the shoulder injury that's been a problem. And last night was like the coup de grace was like, I needed that touchdown from CeeDee Lamb to beat Jeff Darlington.
Are you thinking what I'm thinking right
I thought it was coup de grace. Isn't
it not coup de grace?
Isn't it coup de grace rather than coup de grace?
Yeah, I'm saying Bugs Bunny would say coup de grace.
Okay,
So
all right,
that's,
got it.
I
That's
caught
fair.
it
Like
somewhere between.
like you pronounce, some people say theater,
It's coup de
tomato,
grace if you want to get
Coup de grace.
French.
Okay, all right.
But I was doing the version
the
for you
American
guys.
version.
We were
Thank
doing animations last night with The Simpsons. I was
That's
giving
true.
you a little of the
Yeah.
Bugs version.
Hey, I'll tell you what. Speaking of that, we had a big tweet that said from Himo Viola talking about Lisa Simpson's NFL debut. 4 receptions, 85 yards from scrimmage, 2 total touchdowns, including a game winner, 1 win on only 8 snaps.
Wow.
Feels like the future is really
Efficiency
bright
in
there
the Mike
Cincy.
playbook.
Yeah, that is impressive right there. Really well done. Great tweet. Last thing from this game is just Rico Dowdle. Another solid night there for Rico, who we talked about how he and Chase Brown are kind of like 2 guys looking at each other, by the way. Like, we get all the snaps. Like, all the snaps go to us. He was effective. He was efficient last night. Didn't find the end zone, but if you're going to account for 141 scrimmage yards, that screams top 20 running back the rest of the season.
Yeah, 19 touches and that many yards. It feels like we had been having this conversation. CeeDee Lamb is the only guy you are interested in starting in this Dallas offense. I think Rico Dowdle has crept up into that flex play, flex consideration here.
Yep.
So that's going to be very exciting. And quick shout out, too, to our friends, obviously Drew Carter and Dan Orlovsky and Mina Kimes for everything they did on that Simpsons cast.
So
very
fun.
fun to be able to see.
Yeah, something different, right?
Yeah, that was a very good time. Also, I mean, honestly, I would love to be able to have this every single Monday Night Football. The regular Monday Night broadcast, you got Peyton and Eli, and then the Simpsons broadcast. I'm not sure it gets more fun than that.
You got 2 Monday night games next week. Don't forget that. And by the way, for those of you that are wondering, yeah, we all had the same reaction that you did to the punt at the end of the game.
Oh, my gosh.
I feel so bad for the kid. Just let the football come to rest. It's yours.
I was so
Wild
so
game.
sad.
The Bengals get their win. They have a little bit of life, just a teeny tiny shred of life to make the AFC playoffs.
Yep. All right, when we come back, we're going to dive into waivers for Week 15 with a little game of stash or pass. We'll see you guys in just a moment. ESPN Bet Live returns on Thursday at 6 p.m. and has everything that you need to know before betting this week's NFL slate. Aaron, Joe, and Tyler will be there throughout the weekend, helping you with all the picks, props, and parlays you need. Check out ESPN Bet Live. Back here on Fantasy Focus Football, my name is Daniel Dopp alongside Stephania Bell and Field Yates. Let's dive into a game of stash or pass for the Week 15 waiver wire. Stephania, I want to start with you. First and foremost, before we dive into any running backs, I want to ask you about Isaac Guerendo, who plays Thursday night against the Rams. What can you tell us about any updates for his injury?
Right. So remember, he left in the 4th quarter with what is being called a foot sprain. Kyle Shanahan said they're treating it day to day. He's not really expected to do much in the next 2 days. And Kyle Shanahan said hopefully there's enough time for him to be able to go by Thursday. Guerendo has expressed some confidence that he'll be able to go. If he cannot go, it will be Patrick Taylor to start, back up by Keyshawn Vaughn and Izzy Abanikanda. Here's what you're hoping for fantasy purposes. You're hoping that it is a clear delineation. If he can't go, please sit out. Because if Isaac Guerendo starts but then limps off the field after a series or a quarter, that's a worst case scenario, both for his health, because it probably means a setback, and for fantasy managers. So hopefully we'll get a few better hints going into Thursday night, but I think it could come down to the wire.
Seems like we could be on to RB4 in that 49ers backfield, field. It's tough putting 2 fields together there. But this is one of those situations. 49ers have the 7th most rushing yards in the NFL. They're top 10 in rushing touchdowns. It feels like Patrick Taylor might have a little bit of value in case there is no Isaac Guerendo.
Yeah, so a little bit of value there. This is not some star player. He played his college ball at Memphis. He was originally with the Packers, briefly with the Patriots, latched on with the 49ers this offseason, has stuck around largely on the practice squad until recently. He is still the 4th string running back, so we have to keep hopes relatively in check. But let's just talk through where we are at now on the fantasy football calendar, okay? Here's the reality. The playoffs have begun, and buys are behind us. So if you are still actively monitoring waivers, there are a few factors that you're no longer concerned about. If you had, I'm just making this up, Chris Boswell, and you really felt like you didn't want to subject him to waivers, and you picked up a second kicker, bye-bye. That player is gone, right? If you had Lamar Jackson or Jaden Daniels or Bo Nix, your second quarterback, if it was sort of like a fringy quarterback, I'm just making this up because it's a guy that I've had in a couple of leagues. If you added Drake May as your number 2 quarterback to utilize him at some point, he's been solid. I don't think he is good enough that he is going to be grabbed by another playoff team. A player like that could be dropped. If you have a player that you've been holding on to that you're just not totally convinced is actually ever going to crack your playoff lineup, he can go as well. on top of all of this, how many teams are you competing for other waiver wire targets against, right? So if you have players that are kind of fringy players on your roster, you can say goodbye to them right now, that even if you don't plan on starting Patrick Taylor, you can play some defense right now. So I am not against the idea of adding Patrick Taylor or some of the other guys that we'll discuss, even if they don't fit into your lineup, but to prevent them from fitting into somebody else's lineup.
Yeah. I will say this, too. 49ers are good with depth at running back. We've seen guys who are buried in the depth chart come out and perform before. Sure. Also, he's the only one who's been with the 49ers for longer than about a week and a half.
Yeah, he should play
so,
a lot if he does.
If Isaac Guerendo is not going, it will be largely Patrick Taylor.
Yeah, I think the fear if he does play and Isaac Guerendo does not, is that we get more of the version that we saw of Jordan Mason after that first month, which is, hey, we're going to let you run the football 15 or 18 times, but you're not catching anything.
Right.
Because remember, Jordan Mason for like a month and a half was like an outside of the top 30 running back after that red hot start. But still, desperate times call for desperate measures. I would be adding Patrick Taylor off the waiver wire right now.
I think all that is really valuable as we talk in, these next couple of players as well, Stephania, because a lot of them are potentially adding players based on injury. With no teams on a bye, it feels like you're really going down this list to be able to consider starting them, but maybe blocking another opponent or just having some depth. What can you tell us about Breece Hall before we dive into Isaiah Davis?
Yeah, we're really not sure on his status for this week. He had that MCL hyperextension injury that has been problematic for him for a couple of weeks and then was finally held out completely in week 14. So remains to be seen what he will be able to do this week and if he'll be able to play. The Jets were very clear that they were not planning on shutting him down for this season. So I think they wanted to give him a week of recovery and see how he responded.
Basically a 50-50 snap split here between Isaiah Davis and Braylon Allen. I expected Braylon Allen to get a little bit more run than Davis, but it seems like the Jets are very content to be able to utilize both of these running backs out of the backfield.
Totally. It was exactly one snap that separated them. 37 for Allen, 36 for Isaiah Davis. The same number of overall opportunities for these two players. Worth noting, Braylon Allen still available in over 50% of leagues as well. If you go to the projections for Week 15, you will now see Breece Hall in there, but in the event he is not, I suspect those two players will be pretty closely linked. We saw Isaiah Davis look sharp in the passing game. That's no surprise based off how he performed at the collegiate level as well. Both two young, promising players. Stephania mentioned it, the Jets don't want to shut Breece Hall down, but at the same time, you're balancing a lot of factors, which is including the fact that Breece Hall, I'm sure, is still viewed by the Jets as their long-term option at running back for a 4-9 team. How much is worth risking at this point? Maybe even 3.
This is always such an interesting double-edged sword to me, right? The Jets are out of it.
Yep.
So they don't really have anything to play for. You would think not risk a player. But Breece Hall talked just recently about how this has been the most difficult year of his life with the struggles to stay healthy after coming back and having such a phenomenal season, the struggle within the Jets season overall. And then to have this be the end, that he has this setback with the same knee that he had reconstructed. Yeah. If he is healthy, sometimes you want him to taste the field so that he goes into the offseason and, is secure coming back next year or confident coming back next year.
I want to look also at another backup running back situation. We saw Sincere McCormick clearly outtouch Amir Abdullah 17-2 in last week's game. Yeah. Stephania, in that Raiders backfield, do we have any updates on either of the two starting running backs, and Alexander Mattison or Zamir White?
Zamir White's still not practicing. We haven't seen him yet. Alexander Mattison was questionable coming into week 14. I would point out he was only averaging 3.3 yards per carry when he was healthy. Sincere McCormick is averaging almost 5.5 yards per carry. So even if Alexander Mattison is healthy, I'm liking Sincere McCormick in this offense.
I'm on Stephania's team here. I don't even know if Mattison will play again the rest of the season. They're 2-11, right? Yeah. Mattison is a veteran, kind of been around the block. What's the value right now if you're a team that's trying to evaluate all the players on this roster that might be around for the long term and playing a guy over Sincere McCormick, who, as Stephania said, has looked good. Really good. Like, they have totally caught my attention. They said all the right things about Sincere McCormick last week.
They were sincere.
They were very sincere about it.
Here's what I was curious on from the Monday to Saturday comments to the actual Sunday utilization. Was like, all right, yeah, they're saying all the right things, but if they get behind in this game, or if it's 3rd and 7, are we just going to see Amir Abdullah all the time? As you pointed out, Daniel, it was the Sincere McCormick show, played 59% of the snaps, looks the part, got 3 targets as well. That's important to me. So not totally sure that with every team playing the rest of the way that he'll crack my top 25 of running backs. but he has my attention, and in a deeper league, you do a lot worse.
I want to talk about the Jacksonville Jaguars backfield
Why?
as well. Just quickly, we can be real quick on this.
Fast, yeah.
Honestly, Tank Bigsby basically stole all of the rushing game work from Travis Etienne. Travis Etienne still did get a little bit of work in the passing game, but it's clearly the Tank Bigsby show from a ground game perspective, and that's it.
Here's the big question. They won that game last week. That game was close all game. If you have confidence that the Jets are not going to be steamrolling the Jaguars, we'll see a lot of Tank Bigsby.
Yeah.
If the Jets are up 14-0, like I just talked about with the Raiders, being down 14-0 to the Buccaneers, you'll see a lot more Travis Etienne.
The hard part for me is what kind of confidence do you have in a running back on a 3-10 Jaguars team that scored the fourth fewest points in the NFL? It's one of those, like, he needs to find the end zone if he's going to be useful for your fantasy squad.
He did find it last week.
He did. Hopefully that can continue. All right, Playoff Stash is brought to you by our friends over at Wingstop. Talking about some guys you want on your bench heading into your playoff push. And I feel like there's one guy that stood out to me more than the rest of them, and that was Adam Thielen.
Yeah, how great has this guy been?
We mentioned it the last couple of weeks. 2 weeks in a row, he's had over 19 fantasy points, really good volume here, and Bryce Young and these Panthers are still fighting.
Yeah, I was dismissive of the efforts of Carolina against the Eagles, thinking, like, this could be a blowout, right? So I was a little bit lower a lot bit lower on Adam Thielen than I should have been. And also highlighting that, remember, like, early in the season, it was a mess for the entire offense.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not that anymore.
No.
I don't know if we do most improved player in the NFL, but Bryce Young for week 2 to Bryce Young right now is on the short list, right?
And their whole offense seems to be clicking. Do you know that Adam Thielen, since returning from the hamstring injury, is 20 for 258 and a touchdown?
Yep,
That's
right.
awesome.
Yeah, back-to-back games. He's been awesome.
Shame on you, Mike Clay. Age is but a number. He is 34 and he is thriving.
Yeah, 17 catches for 201 yards with a 25% and 33% target share over the last 2 weeks. I don't think this team is going to face a better secondary than they did this past week in Philadelphia. If Thielen's getting the job done last week, you should feel really good about Adam Thielen once again in Week 15.
Yeah, you feel out of all the guys we have talked about so far on this list, Adam Thielen is the one that gives me the most confidence if I had to put them into my playoff win-or-go-home lineup. Adam Thielen, with the way he's playing right now, feels like he is the one that gives me the most little bit of zhuzh for my lineup there.
Zhuzh.
Yeah, a little Liz Loza word. That's a
Coup de
Liz.
grace?
Yeah, it's very similar. Yeah.
Zhuzh is like what you do to your hair.
All right, that is Playoff Stash brought to you by Wingstop. When we come back, my friends, we're going to talk about some home stretch heroes, guys down the stretch that can maybe help your fantasy squad. We're going to see you back here in just a moment. Remember to tune in to Fantasy Football Now on Sunday and join me, Mike Clay, Field Yates, Stephania Bell, Damian Woody, Liz Loza, and Eric Moody as we get ready for Week 15 of the fantasy football season. From injuries to rankings, we have got you covered. Find us on ESPN2 this Sunday starting at 10 a.m. all the way up until kickoff. Back here on Fantasy Focus alongside Field Yates and Stephania Bell. My name is Daniel Dopp. Diving into a new segment, Home Stretch Heroes. Looking at a couple people down the stretch here that could help your fantasy playoff lineup. We're each going to bring a few guys to the table, talk about why we like them, and then we can sort of go back and forth from there. Stephania, I want to start with you. If you had a couple guys you were going to bring to the table, tell me the 4 people you have for your home stretch heroes.
So I've got a quarterback in Bo Nix, because I think he's been a pleasant surprise. I've got running back Isaac Guerendo. No shocker. I know you're all going to call me a homer, but argue with me on this one. I dare you. Wide receiver. Running back Chuba Hubbard. And wide receiver Juwan Jennings. So yeah, I have 2 49ers in there, but like I said, argue with me on those. I can make my cases for them if you like.
Please, yes.
I mean, Bo Nix, I think he's been the revelation, right? The rookie that we did not expect to see thrive as he has, and really the gift has been in the rushing that he has provided. But he's been consistent. He's averaged 17.5 fantasy points across the season. He's 8th overall among quarterbacks. Would you have thought that Bo Nix would be in your top 10 for fantasy points? Not I, especially when the average air yards per pass early on was something, under double digits. So he's just continued to grow and develop and gain confidence. And I love what I'm seeing. He's finding Cortland Sutton. He's scoring touchdowns. Bo Nix for consistency. I am going to be starting him in my playoff push. So I'm giving you him as a home stretch hero. Isaac Guerendo, running back 2 in week 14. And he left early with an injury. Isaac Guerendo gave us a career starting performance in his first start for the 49ers. We've talked about him enough. You know that there's an injury concern for this week that he might miss because of the Thursday night game. But I will say this. Clearly, it's not so serious that they're leaving the door open for him Thursday night. If he does miss, you feel much better about the extra 10 days that they get between the games before he could go again. So I still think he's a great stash to have on your bench. Chuba Hubbard, 8th in carries, 15th in receptions on the season among running backs. I don't think any of us saw that kind of workload coming. We did think that he might be usurped by Jonathan Brooks' arrival on the scene. Unfortunately, the sad news to go with why Chuba Hubbard looks so good down the stretch is that Jonathan Brooks retore his ACL last week. You saw him go down on a non-contact injury play. He had to kind of hop limp off the field, and they didn't know right away. You know, I think they were holding out hope he had pain. They weren't sure, but now it's been confirmed. He did re-tear his ACL. And I just got to say, guys, not only does it break my heart as a physical therapist, you know how hard these players work to come back from an injury like this, but the timing of it, they were conservative with bringing him back.
Yeah.
He tears it in December. Typically, the recovery process is slower after you have a second injury for all the reasons you would anticipate. You also don't know right now what the situation is inside the knee. How does it look? Is it a clean injury, et cetera? What they do and decisions they make for how they approach surgery next time. You look at the seasonal calendar. Are we going to see Jonathan Brooks next year? Just a question. Just think about that.
Totally.
So, but to go forward with this year, Chuba Hubbard, 30 touches in week 14, running back 12 in fantasy points on this season. So, listen.
He's been awesome.
He's been amazing.
And he seems like the only guy, honestly, in that backfield that you're even interested in. So Chuba Hubbard going to continue to do what he did even before Jonathan Brooks started,
right.
unfortunately.
And then Juwan Jennings, I mean, we've talked about him so much over the course of the season. This week, 28 fantasy points, 2 touchdowns, and he's been prolific. Of the 8 touchdowns caught by 49ers wide receivers this season, Jennings has 6 of them.
Yeah.
6. Debo has 1, and Ricky Pearsall has 1. Among wide receivers, you know, obviously George Kittle's been a touchdown machine, but think about that. Juwan Jennings playing more snaps, making better plays, basically stole a pick from a defender and turned it into a catch last week. He would have been wide receiver 3 in this offense, but Brandon Ayuk got hurt, so he has been elevated. So you know that he's going to be featured going forward. Wide receiver 17 in fantasy points on the season. You would never have thought that going in. And he missed 2 weeks this year with an injury.
Clearly the wide receiver one in this 49ers offense and can be a huge, potential league winner for fantasy managers here down the stretch. Field, you got a trio of heroes that you want to bring to the table.
Yeah, so everybody interpreted the heroes a little bit differently. And so mine was a little bit more of like guys who maybe if things happen around them could be more useful. So let's talk about them. We discussed Sincere McCormick just a little while ago. And while I said it might be hard for him to crack that top 25 right away, again, we're just a couple of injuries away to running backs, and maybe the Raiders playing a little more respectable from this guy having a big role. And again, I don't think we'll see a lot of Alexander Mattison, if any, this week and potentially for the rest of the season for a 2-11 team. Trey Benson, I know that you guys are probably sick of us mentioning this name because we've been talking about him since what? August?
Yep.
Probably April when he got drafted by the Arizona Cardinals. But just think about what happened last week with Breece Hall, right? I mean, Breece Hall had been on the field every game this season until last week. And if you added Braylon Allen or Isaiah Davis, I know, Stephania, you talked about Isaiah Davis helping you significantly. Like, those guys were usable fantasy running backs in the final week of the regular season. So just keep Trey Benson on your roster if you have the spot. And then finally, Kendre Miller. And, the Saints obviously have been as banged up as perhaps any team in the NFL, certainly on the short list, along with the 49ers and a couple of other squads, the Lions defense, the Chiefs with some impactful injuries. But Kendre Miller looked good last week. We've talked about this, how Kendre Miller just felt like he and Dennis Allen were on the same page to the point that he was put on IR earlier this season for an injury that it sure sounds like he thought he did not need to go on IR for, but looked good this past week. Took some work away from Alvin Kamara, scored the team's lone rushing touchdown this past week. As we know, Derek Carr being classified as week to week right now by the Saints. That's according to head coach Darren Rizzi, interim head coach Darren Rizzi. But Kendre Miller, again, like Alvin Kamara, almost 30-year-old running back, like you should just be ensuring your roster right now with players like that, just in case. The last thing you want to do is get stuck with your hands tied behind your back because you go into week 15 without your insurance policy, somebody else grabs that player, and then you potentially have an injury and don't have the replacement waiting in the wings.
Yep. I got 4 heroes I brought to the table, similar to the vein that you had, Field, a little bit deeper on down this list. We've already mentioned 2 of them, so I'm going to skip through them pretty quickly. Sincere McCormick, we already talked about. He obviously out-touched Amir Abdullah 17-2. Feels like he's the guy in this Raiders backfield. And Adam Thielen at the wide receiver spot, over 19 fantasy points in back-to-back games. You love that. But at the quarterback spot, I threw in Matthew Stafford. Since week 8, he has 16 touchdowns and only 3 interceptions, multiple touchdowns in all but 1 game. 5 of his last 7 games, he's been over 17.5 fantasy points, which that's my line for starters, right around 16. One of those other games, he had 15.5, so it's not awful. He's been pretty good for you if you need a quarterback for some reason in case someone gets hurt here in the playoffs. I think he's been playing really well. And Juwan Johnson at the tight end spot, obviously no Taysom Hill, at least 12 fantasy points in 2 of his last 3 games there, so he is the tight end 1. Over that 3-game span, he's tied with Alvin Kamara for the most targets and receptions amongst running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends in this Saints offense. Second most fantasy points on the Saints team behind Alvin Kamara also over that span since Taysom Hill got hurt. So to me, I would rather have him than MVS or anyone else in that wide receiving core. Just another tight end that in case you need someone a little bit farther on down, a couple guys that you can consider. Stephania, there is a chance we will not see Derek Carr, obviously, this week. He's rostered in barely over 15% of leagues, but just to be able to give him an update.
Make a difference in terms of who might be throwing the ball to Juwan Johnson. I think you're going to expect to see Derek Carr out this week. Field already mentioned it. They're calling him week to week, but on top of the hand injury that he had, which the way they're phrasing it is no surgery indicated at this time. And if he's able to play through it, then we'll get to that when we get to it, because the first issue is that he's in concussion protocol. So knowing that, you've got to resolve the concussion and you're trying to resolve a hand injury at the same time. Just from a treatment navigation standpoint, that's more challenging. I would anticipate we have somebody else under center this week. They haven't made that official. I'm leaning that way, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't say this because I think other quarterbacks aren't tough. They are all extremely tough. Derek Carr's got a pretty darn good track record of finding his way back onto the field. Went medically cleared. And this week seems like a long shot. But
the concussion part is the number one. And remember, he had 2 concussions last year.
Yeah. I'm just saying, so I'm saying this only because there was some speculation this could be no more Derek Carr this season. That's possible. There's only 4 weeks left, but I also wouldn't put past this guy, even if that hand is not 100%, to find his way back. Yeah, you're a quarterback and you kind of need your hands, but maybe they play exclusively from shotgun.
I feel
so.
right.
Well, shotgun's not the easiest if you have a fracture in your hand either, so there's a lot of things there and you risk re-injuries. There's a whole bunch of nuance to it. We'll talk about it later.
Saints fans are just frustrated. Don't have Derek Carr, don't have Taysom Hill, don't have Chris Olave, don't have Rashid Shaheed. It feels like their offense, they started out really hot this season too.
Yep.
So
went a long way.
It's been really tough, unfortunately, for Saints fans. All right, when we come back, we're going to dive into a new segment called Yates of Hell. Can't wait to see what that's going to be. Yeah. We'll see you guys in just one moment. Download the ESPN Bet Sportsbook to claim your new player bonus, and for a limited time only, unlock access to 30 days of ESPN Plus to stream exclusive live sports. Sign up with the promo code FANTASY to get started today. Back here on Fantasy Focus alongside Field Yates, Stephania Bell, I am Daniel Dopp. Let's dive into a new segment called Yates of Hell, Field Yates. Guys that have been giving us a heck of a time recently.
There it is. I was waiting. I was like, I know Tyler's going to come up. Producer Tyler's going to come up with some kind of crazy graphic. I was hoping for smoke, smoke coming
fog
up
machines
from behind
and everything.
us. Yeah, fog machines.
Nothing should be put past Tyler Martin.
I agree.
Nothing.
It's like the
Tyler
Bells,
Martin. I meant
too,
Tyler Mowbray. I just got a text from someone named Tyler Martin. Shout out to you, Tyler Martin. Tyler Mowbray, though, our great producer, has me a little bit fired up right now. And here we go, baby. It is week 15. The fantasy football playoffs are upon us. And you know what you do not need right now? You don't need guys that you trust and they go in the lineup and they give you 5 fantasy points. None of that crap, all right? I don't want it, all right? So here are the players that got me a little bit fired up right now going into the fantasy football playoffs. And frankly, I'm not so sure that I'm starting you. I might put you in timeout this week. I might not play you at all for the rest of the season. Let's begin in Chicago. The underlying metrics for running back DeAndre Swift, all pretty good. Playing a lot of snaps, played like 80% of the snaps this past week, 15 or more opportunities seemingly every single week, a little bit involved in the passing game. All that is sweet. You know what's actually good, though, in fantasy football? Fantasy points.
Fantasy points.
How about this past week? What'd you do for me, DeAndre Swift? Not great. Another ho-hum back-to-back games. Under 10 fantasy points. And who do you guys play on Monday Night Football? The Detroit Lions.
Yikes.
Yeah. How have the Lions fared against running backs for much of this season? outstanding. Yeah, Josh Jacobs found the end zone 3 times last week. That was awesome. The Bears, hardly scored 3 touchdowns in a single game. It's been a while since we have seen DeAndre Swift find the end zone. The Lions have allowed the second fewest fantasy points to opposing running backs. DeAndre Swift, you're going to have a hard time finding my lineup this week. None of this is personal, by the way. Make that very clear.
This week, they played Monday Night Football against the Minnesota Vikings field.
I said the Lions. I meant the Vikings. Not
That's
that
just
much
as
better.
tough of a matchup. Seriously.
No better.
It could be worse. I'm just laughing how Field goes on this amazing rant, and then he's like, none of it's personal.
He
doesn't want you mad at him.
Oh, it's not. I mean, I just don't want this, the last thing in the social media era.
know.
So anyways, it's not personal. I'm just saying right now, how do you trust these players? How do you do it?
Well, you mentioned it. Chicago Bears get the Minnesota Vikings and Detroit Lions back-to-back, 2 brutal matchups for DeAndre Swift.
Yes. Okay. So bad matchups, but and it's just hard, right? The offense is much more potent through the air than it is on the ground. So I would have a hard time considering him a total lineup lock this week.
I want Fields' next rant to be on my behalf.
Yeah.
Can I ask him?
Are you going to earmuff this one, or are you here for it?
No, I'm here for it. I'm here for it.
Okay. Do you want the good news or the bad news? The good news. All right,
Let's start with the good news.
Always start with the good news. That's a rule of life.
I thought you start with the bad news, and then you could lift me up at the end.
No, because this is called the Yates of Hell. It's not called the Yates
I've
of
got
Heaven.
nothing
If
to
it
look
were we do the
forward
bad news,
to.
then the good news first.
What's the
Although
good
there would be
news?
no bad news because we would be in glorious heaven. Deebo Samuel had his best week in 4 weeks last week.
Oh, really?
Best week.
What did he do?
He finished wide receiver 51.
Yikes.
51.
How many fantasy points?
50 other wide receivers were better than him.
5.5.
5.5 fantasy points.
Is that bad?
Over his
Sounds bad.
last 6 games, his most fantasy points scored in a single game of those, 12.6 fantasy points. Wasn't this guy the most explosive, dangerous offensive player in the NFL 3 seasons ago who got that $24 million per year contract extension? Last night he's on Twitter saying, hey, it's not my fault. I'm just not getting the opportunities. We have the numbers, man. It is kind of your fault. You're not nearly as explosive this season as we have seen from Deebo Samuel in years past. Has scored 1 receiving touchdown all season. 1.
Yeah, I know.
And so, a month ago, I was telling Mike, we got to get the gap between Juwan Jennings and Deebo Samuel a whole lot wider. What is it now? It's the gap is about as wide as the U.S. right now, right? Juwan Jennings is the top of the mountain right now for 49ers wide receivers, and Deebo Samuel is hollering from the depths of the bottoms. Can I get some too? But I don't know how you trust Deebo Samuel.
Well, here's the thing.
Can't.
We thought
It's
we
a
were
good
going to
matchup.
get more rushing out of him potentially with this injury to Christian McCaffrey. Might they use him differently? But let me tell you, I'm going to add to the bad news. Matt Barrows, who covers the team for The Athletic, said with his rushing attempts, Deebo is 2.9 yards per carry, 2.9 yards per carry this year. That's the lowest if you go back to 2019 when Deebo was peak yards per carry at 11.4. 2.9 to 11.4. Okay, 11.4, you might say that's an outlier, unsustainable. Well, his average over the last 3 years was 5.93 yards per carry when he was used as a runner. So there is something there for sure.
And doesn't it feel like this would have been the year in which you would have seen even more rushing from Deebo with all the CMC injuries and everything?
This is what I mean. But even when he's getting the ball, he's not been very efficient.
No, he hasn't.
Yeah, I guess the question would be Deebo says he needs the ball more. It's not him. If the answer were Deebo, when you're down to your 4th string running back, with one of the greatest offensive minds of the past 15 years.
Absolutely.
If the answer was him, we would have already turned to him. So anyways, I don't trust Deebo Samuel. I am very nervous about him, even in what should be a decent matchup. Did you guys watch the Bills this past week? Every Bills wide receiver seemingly went off. Matt Collins scored a touchdown. Amari Cooper had 14 targets. Obviously, Khalil Shakir was awesome, as he always is. So
doesn't feel
no
great.
trust.
Yeah, no trust in Deebo Samuel.
You guys tell me, when you find a player that you trust and you feel differently about, please let me know, because right now we're 0 for 2.
The hard part for me is this next player you're going to talk about. I touted as a mini Deebo Samuel coming into the season. I meant that in a positive way, but it turned out to be the same negative conversation.
You were a little too,
it's your fault.
Yeah, a little too on the money.
I flew too close to the sun with this one.
All right, so 18.25.
Okay.
That's a good number of fantasy points to score per game, right?
18.25 is good. Yeah, I take that.
18.25 receiving yards per game.
Oh,
bad.
That's not good.
Yeah, that's what Gene Reed has over the past 4 weeks. Oh, he had 0 points last week, by the way. 0.0 points.
I'm sure he's had receptions that were more than that in just one catch in the past.
Probably, yeah. So you guys remember that monster week one, 33.1 fantasy points?
Of course.
That accounts for 19.6% of Jaden Reed's total season points.
Wow.
19.6% came in one game in its Week 15 of the NFL season. Rob Domofsky, who covers the Packers at a brilliant level for us here on ESPN, wrote about this morning. When you got a lot of guys who want the football and need the football, it's hard to guarantee someone touches, not named Josh Jacobs. They ran 45 plays last week, did the Packers, because the Lions just pummeled them at the line of scrimmage. They were excellent, obviously. Both teams were really good. But it's just, I don't know, there is nothing that is more deflating in the playoffs than when you go into, maybe you guys feel differently. Let me know. I'd rather lose a playoff matchup 175 to 174 than, I'd rather lose by one in a very high-scoring matchup than either lose a close one where I just don't get a whole lot from my roster or just get blown out. I don't like to lose in general. We're all humans, right? But I don't know, man.
I'll tell you what I do. When I start a guy that has 0 fantasy points at the end of the week, I immediately look at my bench and say, if I only had played this guy on my bench.
Right.
And
it's
I
the
hate
fantasy
doing that.
regret. We all have it. We all do it.
And it feels like Jaden Reed started out. I mean, you mentioned the hot start. He was so great from that perspective. You loved a lot of the rushing usage that he got last year. Again, that rushing usage has gone down quite a bit here in 2024. Too many guys to be able to spread the ball around to. Not enough consistency. I was so pumped about Jaden Reed, but unfortunately, I'm with you, Field. I cannot trust him in any of my playoff lineups.
These guys, none of the players that I've talked about yet lack talent.
No.
It's fantasy football. Things can happen, right? Tyreek Hill is heating up, right? Tyreek Hill, who we thought, we're like, what is going on here? 14 targets last week. This guy has looked like Tyreek Hill. Things change fast. But we're playing the law of averages here. And the law of averages over the past 4 weeks for Jaden Reed has been so bad that I would be very hesitant to play him this week
100%.
in a championship match.
Agreed.
Answer your question?
Match.
I'd rather get blown out.
You would?
Yeah, because if I'm a point, then I'm like, why didn't that guy just one more yard or, one more reception? Or what,
or if only that offensive lineman hadn't held on that play and called back
or
the
why did they call back? Why did that thing get called back on a penalty? Or if it's I lose by 30 points, I'm like, well, there's nothing I could have done. We gave it our best effort, and we failed as a group.
I do the feeling I love the most, and then we'll move on, Field.
The feeling I love the most is when I win.
Of course you love winning, and then when I lose, the feeling I love the most is when I look at my lineup and say, no matter what I would have done, it wouldn't have mattered anyway.
Of course, you like those. Those are the things that you can live with the most. But just, again, a 0 or a very, very small number from a guy, not good.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure we should talk about the next guy.
I wonder why he even made the list.
He's not in my top 25 for tight ends this week.
He's not worth your energy.
Do you guys remember when Kyle Pitts scored points?
No.
I don't really remember that either.
I think he was in London, right?
Yes, his rookie season. I believe it was London. As the bell dings here. It was in London. What do I tell you on Kyle Pitts? He had 6 targets last week. That was kind of cool. He caught one of them. So this offense just isn't consistent enough to support all of them. And by the way, there's 3 guys well ahead of him. Ahead of him in this offense. Obviously Drake London, obviously Darnell Mooney, obviously Bijan Robinson. I just don't understand, again, the Falcons.
Ray McLeod.
Yeah, Ray McLeod. I mean, heck, he's ahead of him too. He's option 5 on an offense that isn't. Kirk Cousins is throwing for some decent yards. But if you're going to turn the football over and not find the end zone enough, there's just not enough upside across the board in this offense to have things happen like this. And what I will say here on Kyle Pitts, last thing, the Falcons are, they're being pressed right now because they're 6-7, and truthfully, not a very good football team.
Nope.
Underwhelming.
Yep.
And
disappointing.
The answers on Kyle Pitts, not very encouraging either. We don't care about stats, fantasy football, whatever. Kyle Pitts ain't going to be a thing for them right now. Ain't going to be a thing. All right, last one here. You want one more?
I want to say one thing, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it, yeah.
If you have Kyle Pitts on your roster, he has to be a tight end too. There's no way you're still starting Kyle Pitts and you have made the fantasy playoffs. It feels like everything else would have to go right. You had mentioned earlier in the show, we had talked about a handful of guys, Isaiah Davis, Sincere McCormick, Tank Bigsby, Adam Thielen. I would drop Kyle Pitts for literally everybody that we talked about in our waiver wire segment because they have so much more upside.
Yep. All right, last one here is Kirk Cousins. And again, I don't know how much we actually have to say, guys. Going into the playoffs, so if you're going to lose, as Daniel said, like, you'd rather lose when you set the optimal lineup and it still wasn't good enough.
Yep.
All right. One of the worst ways to lose in fantasy football is by not doing the commonsensical thing and overthinking it and letting that player be the reason why you lost.
Yeah.
And based off of this season, Kirk Cousins, other than when he plays the Bucs, hasn't been good enough to be inside your lineup. So if you want to play him this upcoming week, I don't know why you would do it in the first place. We'll have the conversation about Kirk Cousins in Week 16 against the Giants, but even that one makes you a little bit nervous because Kirk Cousins has been in remarkable spots, not good spots, remarkable spots throughout this season and let you down. So you decide if you want to have that happen one more time and it might cost you a playoff matchup, go for it. But for a player who has been so great for so long, it just ain't happening this season.
The interception trend is too high for me. You're taking points off the table. I do not want that.
Right, with 0 rushing. When you have 0.0 rushing upside, you have to be a turnover-free quarterback, and he is not. He is the exact opposite of that this season. I love Kirk. He's been a fun player to watch, but he is not somebody that threatens you in fantasy right now.
Totally with you, unfortunately. All right. That was Yates of Hell. That was fun. We got to bring that back sometime a little bit later on. Yeah.
The original Yates of Hell.
I love it.
Who actually is on the Falcon staff now.
There you go, Field Yates.
Yeah.
Look at that. Synergy, the way everything comes together. When we come back, we got more here on Fantasy Focus. We'll see you guys in just a moment. The best part about ESPN Fantasy is you guys, the fantasy football community, and we want to make sure that we are always answering your questions. Head on over to Twitter to use the hashtag FFNow to drop in your questions for your Week 15 lineup. Use the hashtag FFNow and tune in on Sunday on ESPN2 at 10 a.m. Eastern to see if your questions make it onto the show. Back here on Fantasy Focus, we're going to dive really quickly into our Fantasy Focus Show League, my friends. And this one is really tough. I feel really bad here. We can talk about a number of different things.
Not badly enough.
I don't feel badly enough. I blocked Stephania in a number of ways on the waiver wire this week.
You don't have to feel bad.
And it worked to perfection for what it's worth.
Believe me, this is the Jedi mind.
To
get him back.
I added Isaac Guerendo and Sam Darnold and Tua for what it's worth because we both needed quarterbacks. Yeah. Both of those quarterbacks were great. Stephania, I only beat you by 20-some fantasy points. If I had not gone out and done that, there's a chance I would have not won this matchup. But instead, I brought home the dub with 169.88 fantasy points. Thank you very much, Jordan Addison and Sam Darnold.
I know. The unlikeliest leader of your pack was Sam Darnold, and then you broke my heart with the 26.8 from Isaac Guerendo. Again, rude, but expected. Good strategy.
Thank you.
Like if I wasn't playing against you,
I know,
I'd be all for it. But you broke my heart. You made me sweat this one out.
I did, unfortunately, and we were all sweating it out because the three of us were in line for playoff contention, and Field Yates, here is where it sucks. I feel so bad saying this. You had the third highest scoring team of the week.
Right.
And still lost to Mike Clay.
Correct.
And didn't make the playoffs.
By the way, you feel bad. I mean, a couple things here. Don't feel bad for me. I'll be okay. All right? I'll be back next year trying to get the title back from last year. I wanted the rest of you guys to feel like you had a chance in this league.
Thank you. Okay, I feel less bad now.
You feel bad for Stephania. You guys are both in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Playoffs, you're both in the playoffs. You don't feel that bad. You guys are fine. You guys are competing.
I was really rooting for you. I just wanted you to take down, and I realized it would have done things here. But any time that Mike Clay can lose at fantasy football, that's what I root for.
Yeah, but Mike Clay was a guy. His. By the way, I think I have to face Mike Clay in the first round.
You do.
I believe you do.
He's got a beatable team.
I know, but didn't he put up 170 points this week?
He did. Highest scoring team of the league.
He got lucky. I put up 141, and I had injuries. I don't even know what I'm going to do in advance of playing him, but I gotta, sprinkle some juju on his.
Mike put up 173.92 against
Maybe
me.
He gave it all a little too early.
I thought you would have thought so. My lineup. I had a monster week. Rashad White, Juwan Jennings, Justin Jefferson. I also had
Justin Jefferson,
Christian Watson's 13.4. Not so bad, right? But Mike, I got Jalen Hurts / Bijan / Kyron / most importantly, Zach Charbonnet. What a monster week for Mike, who at the end, obviously, when George Pickens got ruled inactive, then he had the opportunity to sub him out, and he gets Zach Charbonnet into the lineup. So hats off to Mike for a good win. And we now have the playoff field. Should we get into that, the playoff field?
I just don't think I don't think George Pickens would have scored. I mean, he beat you by like 26 fantasy points. If George
he beat me by 18 fantasy points.
I don't think that we were in a spot.
So Pickens had scored under 22, I'd be in.
Yes. And I think, very likely, I think that would have happened against this team. And maybe I'm wrong. You never know what's going to happen. But, like, that's a good amount of fantasy points. I feel like the idea that Zach Charbonnet just came in and blew the roof off the doors was so frustrating.
Yeah.
Roof off the door. Yeah, a little throwback.
Little throwback there.
Let's see the standings.
Yeah, let's look at the final standings.
I know where I stand.
Yep.
Throwing it up here on the full screen in case you were watching here at home. So Trophy Smack came in first. Our producer, Tyler Mowbray, came in second. Miller Lite Mike in third.
No wonder he wanted us to show the standings.
That's exactly what it was.
Tyler,
Jackson, our buddy Jackson Agello, came in fourth. I'm in fifth. Stephania is in sixth, and those are our 6 playoff teams. Stephania with a 14-14 record. 2 other teams with 14-14 records, and Kevin Pulsifer and Field Yates that did not make the playoffs, as well as our cousin Griffey, who went 13-15, but actually had more points than, he didn't. He had still a good number of points, though. That's one of those things.
Yeah, this is stuff. Just a reminder that, of course, the victory scoring helps out. And let's take a look at what the playoff match looks like now, Daniel.
All right, so when we look at this, Trophy Smack gets a bye, and our producer, Tyler Mowbray, gets a bye.
Yep. Good teams right there.
Which means I'm taking on Jackson Agello, the 4 and 5 seed, and Stephania Bell taking on Miller Lite Mike.
Come on, everybody. You know who you're rooting for here.
Listen, it's not collusion as long as Clay's losing.
Yeah. I completely agree.
So we got to find a way. We got to find a way to make some things happen.
I'm not saying I'd like Mike to lose to Stephania. I'm saying I'd like him to get absolutely smoked
Just
by
demolished.
Stephania. Yeah, that's my actual aspirations and hopes for this weekend.
Okay, well, we're gonna have a little group huddle to consult on my team and see who I can snag. And
I'm going to say this too, and I feel like it's a thing that I don't feel like we need to say it, but after some of the tweets that I've seen over the last week, I feel like it's just a public service announcement. If your team did not make the playoffs, please do not add anybody off of waivers. Unless there is a prize in the consolation bracket and there's something for you to play for in like the losers bracket of your league.
Wait, I want to go back and talk about my team.
Okay, then let's do it, Stephania.
Okay, I'm just looking now because now I'm getting excited because, I was struggling last night. I had to start Will Levis this week because I was so desperate. But I get Bo Nix, who I just said was going to be one of my home stretch heroes.
Oh, yeah.
I get him back. I get Derrick Henry back this week.
Love that.
And who did I start? I had started Aaron Jones and Sincere McCormick.
Yeah.
So I could still maybe use them there. Let's see. Who else do I need? Those were the big ones, but that's big. Getting Derrick Henry back and getting Bo Nix in place of Will Levis. So
that's going to be huge for you.
Yeah. And I need a big George Kittle game. Here's the problem. Deebo Samuel was in my flex. So I got 13.6 fantasy points from him this week.
I don't know as I would start Debo this week if I could help it.
Well, I don't know that I have many better
That you can help
choices. That might be. I might have.
We can
to
talk
just,
about that,
We
Stephania,
can. We
'cause I
can
think we
talk
might.
about it, but we're gonna hope. Come on, everybody! I need a lot of support out there from the community to
Let's
take
make it
on
happen.
Mike Clay. He's feeling very confident with all his young players. I want to beat him with all my second-generation running backs, like my Aaron Jones, my Derrick Henry, and all the guys that he would not support at the start of the season because he said they were too old to play the position. Let's do it.
I just did something very sad. I just closed out, in the app, you can order the team alerts, and I just closed out alerts for the Fantasy Focus show.
That's a tough one.
He
I'm
couldn't
so
wait
sorry.
till we got done with this. He's like, I'm done.
Get it
I
out.
want nothing else.
Field, honestly, you did so well taking what was such an awful team to start the season and just get them in the playoff hunt in the first place.
People are saying that I might be Coach of the Year, which would be a small consolation.
It would be.
We play for trophies at Yates Inc., but every once in a while, some individual personal hardware is not the worst thing to. I can put it up there on the mantle and I'll brag about it. I might get a tattoo if I win Coach of the Year. I'm not promising anything, but I'm also suggesting something. So when the voters have their opportunity to cast their votes, keep that in mind.
Last thing, and then we'll close this thing out. Back in Week 6, Miller Lite Mike took on Stephania Bell, and he beat you 144-127. So you've got a little bit of making up there, Stephania. Obviously, your team still feels the sting of that loss.
Come on now. Back in that day, the Saints were still good on offense.
I don't even know if I had the same players because everybody was hurt.
And I played Jackson Agello once already this year back in Week 11, 135-113. So we're going to hope that Jackson doesn't really bring his A game here. No one wants Jackson to be able to win this
No,
league.
I'm okay with Jackson.
I actually love Jackson.
We all love Jackson. That's the hard part. He's such a nice guy. Like, we would all root for him.
Honestly, as long as Mike doesn't win, I don't care.
Yes, agreed.
I'm happy for any
Mike
of you.
and Trophy Smack. Trophy Smack
Oh, yeah.
was like
Trophy Smack is. Didn't they win last year?
they came in second. Field
Second.
Yates won.
Oh,
last year.
Thank you.
Right. How
But
could I
Trophy
forget?
Smack,
Reigning,
in part
defending.
because they create
That's right. It was a big match.
trash talk like gift cards.
Right.
Oh, remember when
They're
they
really
yeah.
good with it. So
They
like
are.
we don't need them to win this one either. But shout out to Trophy Smack obviously for all the things that they do for us here on the show. We love them as well. Just not this year in the playoffs.
It's just
All right.
not to beat us.
When we wrap this up, we'll be back here in just a little bit with more Fantasy Focused Football. ESPN Bet, my friends. Download the ESPN Bet Sportsbook to claim your new player bonus and for a limited time, unlock access to 30 days of ESPN Plus to stream exclusive live sports. Sign up with the promo code FANTASY to get started today. Back here on Fantasy Focus, Field, Yates, Stephania Bell, Daniel Dopp. That is going to close out our Tuesday show when we come back tomorrow. Field, me, you, and Mike are diving into the Week 15 rankings to help everybody get set up for their fantasy playoffs.
Let's go.
Stephania, you're not going to be here on Friday, is that correct?
I am not. I will be in Dallas doing a baseball thingy, but I will be back on
A
Sunday
baseball
for
thingy.
Fantasy
Nothing like a
Football
boondoggle
Now.
the first week of the playoffs to show how much we
Some
care
of
about
us
your
cover
teams.
multiple sports. That's
Can
all
you
I'm
ask
saying.
Juan Soto to let me borrow $1?
I'm going to be in Dallas, where all of those people have been
$1.
this week.
That's going to do it for us today. Today's show
$1
is presented
from
by
you.
Wingstop. We appreciate you guys. Thank you for hanging out with us today. Don't forget to love each other. Be kind to yourself. We'll see you guys tomorrow.